Mark Twain Selected Works. Autobiographical Dictation. Origins of Tom Sawyer. February 12, 1906. My mother had a good deal of trouble with me, but I think she enjoyed it. She had none at all with my brother Henry, who was 2 years younger than I, and I think that the unbroken monotony of his goodness and truthfulness and obedience would have been a burden to her but for the relief and variety which I furnished in the other direction. I was a tonic. I was valuable to her. I never thought of it before, but now I see it. I never knew Henry to do a vicious thing toward me or toward anyone else, but he frequently did righteous ones that cost me as heavily. It was his duty to report me when I needed a reporting and neglected to do it myself, and he was very faithful in discharging that duty. He is Sid in Tom Sawyer. But Sid was not Henry. Henry was a very much finer and better boy than ever Sid was. It was Henry who called my mother's attention to the fact that the thread with which she had sewed my collar together to keep me from going in swimming had changed color. My mother would not have discovered it but for that, and she was manifestly piqued when she recognized that prominent bit of circumstantial evidence had escaped her sharp eye. That detail probably added a detail to my punishment. It is human. We generally visit our shortcomings on somebody else when there is a possible excuse for it. But no matter, I took it out of Henry. There is always compensation for such as are unjustly used. I often took it out of him, sometimes as an advance payment for something which I hadn't yet done. These were occasions when the opportunity was too strong a temptation, and I had to draw on the future. I did not need to copy this idea from my mother, and probably didn't. It is most likely that I invented it for myself. Still, she wrought upon that principle upon occasion. If the incident of the broken sugar bowl is in Tom Sawyer, I don't remember whether it is or not, that is an example of it. Henry never stole sugar. He took it openly from the bowl. His mother knew he wouldn't take sugar when she wasn't looking, but she had her doubts about me. Not exactly doubts, either. She knew very well I would. One day, when she was not present, Henry took sugar from her prized and precious old English sugar bowl, which was an heirloom in the family, and he managed to break the bowl. It was the first time I had ever had a chance to tell anything on him, and I was inexpressibly glad. I told him I was going to tell on him, but he was not disturbed. When my mother came in and saw the bowl lying on the floor in fragments, she was speechless for a minute. I allowed that silence to work. I judged it would increase the effect. I was waiting for her to ask, "Who did that?" so that I could fetch out my news. But it was an error of calculation. When she got through with her silence, she didn't ask anything about it. She merely gave me a crack on the skull with her thimble that I felt all the way down to my heels. Then I broke out with my injured innocence, expecting to make her very sorry that she had punished the wrong one. I expected her to do something remorseful and pathetic. I told her that I was not the one, it was Henry. But there was no upheaval. She said, without emotion, "It's all right. It isn't any matter. You deserve it for something you've done that I didn't know about. And if you haven't done it, why then you deserve it for something that you are going to do, that I shan't hear about. There was a stairway outside the house which led up to the rear part of the second story. One day Henry was sent on an errand, and he took a tin bucket along. I knew he would have to ascend those stairs, so I went up and locked the door on the inside and came down into the garden, which had been newly plowed and was rich in choice, firm clods of black mold. I gathered a generous equipment of these and ambushed him. I waited till he had climbed the stairs and was near the landing and couldn't escape. Then I bombarded him with clods, which he warded off with his tin bucket the best he could, but without much success, for I was a good marksman. The clods smashing against the weatherboard and fetched my mother out to see what was the matter, and I tried to explain that I was amusing Henry. Both of them were after me in a minute, but I knew the way over that high board fence and escaped for that time. After an hour or two, when I ventured back, there was no one around, and I thought the incident was closed. But it was not. Henry was ambushing me. With an unusually competent aim for him, he landed a stone on the side of my head, which raised a bump there which felt like the Matterhorn. I carried it to my mother straightway for sympathy, but she was not strongly moved. It seemed to be her idea that incidents like this would eventually reform me if I harvested enough of them. So the matter was only educational. I had had a sterner view of it than that before. It was not right to give the cat the painkiller. I realize it now. I would not repeat it in these days. But in those Tom Sawyer days, it was a great and sincere satisfaction to me to see Peter perform under its influence. And if actions do speak as loud as words, he took as much interest in it as I did. It was a most detestable medicine, Perry Davis's painkiller. Mr. Pavy's Negro man, who was a person of good judgment and considerable curiosity, wanted to sample it, and I let him. It was his opinion that it was made of hellfire. Those were the cholera days of '49. The people along the Mississippi were paralyzed with fright. Those who could run away did it, and many died of fright in the flight. Fright killed 3 persons where the cholera killed 1. Those who couldn't flee kept themselves drenched with cholera preventives, and my mother chose Perry Davis's painkiller for me. She was not distressed about herself. She avoided that kind of preventive, but she made me promise to take a teaspoonful of painkiller every day. Originally, it was my intention to keep the promise, but at that time I didn't know as much about painkiller as I knew after my first experiment with it. She didn't watch Henry's bottle. She could trust Henry. But she marked my bottle with a pencil on the label every day and examined it to see if the teaspoonful had been removed. The floor was not carpeted. It had cracks in it, and I fed the painkiller to the cracks, with very good results. No cholera occurred down below. It was upon one of these occasions that friendly cat came waving his tail and supplicating for painkiller, which he got, and then went into those hysterics which ended with his colliding with all the furniture in the room and finally going out of the open window and carrying the flower pots with him, just in time for my mother to arrive and look over her glasses in petrified astonishment and say, "What in the world is the matter with Peter?" I don't remember what my explanation was, but If it is recorded in that book, it may not be the right one.